Yeah. Good morning. I think this time of the season of this time is the best in Korea in terms of weather. So I hope you enjoy the weather outside of this event. But today I am asked to talk about how the Korean government is trying to handle the fiscal recovery or the normalization of a fiscal strategy after the COVID-19 crisis. So I heard that yesterday you already had the flavor of what's happening in Korean fiscal policy. So I'll try to give you a little bit more details, and also in terms of the formality, it's more like a quasi-official the interpretation of the fiscal policy in Korea. So first I'll talk about, briefly I will mention how the Korean fiscal situation has evolved during the COVID-19 crisis, and then I will talk about our current and also the looming fiscal issues. Because even before the COVID-19 crisis, we are anticipating that the Korean fiscal policy is not sustainable in the long term. In the short and the medium term, it's okay, no problem at all, and we have very big fiscal rooms for many policies. But I will talk about later. But we are expecting our fiscal the policy is not sustainable in the long term. So now, because of the COVID-19 crisis, we are having another dimension of the problem, which is even in the medium term, we need to in need of the reform for our fiscal policy framework, especially because. I will talk about that in the second part, and then I will talk about our new medium-term expenditure framework with the start of a new government. Incidentally, our new government started this May. So for this conference topic, we can talk about what the new government is trying to do after the COVID-19 crisis. Okay. Then this is our fiscal situation during the COVID-19 crisis. In 2022, we had 4 supplementary budgets, and our so-called managed fiscal deficit rose to the 5.8% of GDP. The term managed fiscal deficit means usually when you talk about the fiscal government fiscal balance, you include the social insurance. But in our case, our social insurance is not matured yet, so we have huge reserve for the social insurance. So for the prudent management of the government money, we exclude that reserve from the so-called managed fiscal deficit number. That's why we are calling it managed fiscal deficit. So, which rose to the 5.8% of GDP. Previously, it was usually around less than 2% or very close to the balance. So you can see there is a dramatic jump in the fiscal deficit at the initial year of the COVID-19 crisis. And then 2021, we had 2 supplementary budgets. And also our managed fiscal deficit rose to the 6.2% of GDP, and the government debt rose to the 47%, 3% of GDP. And then this year, we already had 2 supplementary budgets, even before the half of this year. That's very unusual. It's a kind of political, it shows the political situation is involved in this supplementary budget, because we had election in the May, sorry, it's early year. So because of the election, even before the budget is starting, there was a discussion about the supplementary budget. So So anyway, so this year we had 2 supplementary budgets, and then the fiscal deficit is expected to be 5.1% of GDP, and the government debt is also expected to reach 49.7% of GDP. So the fiscal deterioration is not so bad in terms of a global standard or even to our expectation, because of the COVID-19 crisis, we found that small and medium-sized enterprise or self-employed business is heavily affected. But in our Korean tax system, actually they are not paying much tax. So, as you may know, the global trade was not bad before the Ukraine crisis. So our big conglomerates are doing very well. And also, as you may know, there is a huge money in the market. So the capital market was booming. So because of that, also we had a lot of tax revenue coming from there. So this fiscal situation has turned out to be better than we expected, because we had a surprise jump in the tax revenue. So even the tax revenue projection by the Ministry of Economy and Finance was kind of it didn't hit the target. It's underestimated. So the size was very big. It's about 70% revenue. More revenue was coming out. So it became the political issue. So the politicians, criticizing the Ministry of Economy and Finance, you guys are intentionally underestimating tax revenues to preserve the kind of your power. That kind of argument was there. But anyway, in the end, our fiscal situation was deteriorated, but it was better than we expected. But the problem was that even before the COVID-19 crisis, with the previous government, the big problem is that the Korean government has been losing the common ground for the fiscal policy framework. So we are losing the kind of common understanding what should be the proper fiscal stance, not just for the medium term, for the long term too. So in the previous government, there was not much discussion about fiscal soundness or fiscal sustainability. And also the COVID-19 crisis also added another rationale. We don't have to talk about that. We have lots of fiscal rooms, so why not spend it? And why not helping people? That kind of argument was dominant. So also the political influence becomes very strong. So even though in Korean the budget system, in the Constitution gives the budget formulation authority to the Ministry of Economy and Finance, but that authority has been under threat in the past several years. So that's why we need a kind of new fiscal framework to cope with this kind of discord in the fiscal policy formulation. So I will talk about what's our current and looming fiscal issues. And I think it can be summed up in 2 ways. The first one is that we need to reform social insurance, the system. And then the second one is that during the COVID-19 crisis, and even before that, there has been a change of trend in accumulating government debt continuously without, the restoring the fiscal balance. So as you can see in the social insurance fund, which includes the pension and the health insurance and also unemployment insurance, all those insurance, the fiscal balance will turn to be negative from 2039. And the baseline projection is saying that in the longer term, it's not sustainable. So it's a kind of it's a given fact for us. It's well known among the policymakers and even in general citizens. But it required huge political, the resistance and political cost. So we are having trouble in reforming the social insurance issues. Then, in addition to that, we had the general government debt is now kind of accumulating. The fiscal deficit is currently at 121.8 trillion Korean won. We cannot translate it into USD, right? The exchange rate is changing every day, nowadays. So in Korean won, then in 2070, it will rise to the 2.1 trillion Korean won. So it's an unsustainable path, and also government debt ratio will increase to the 186% in the 2070 if we just stay in the current path. So also this table shows you that especially from the 2017 to this year, our debt is continuously accumulating even before the COVID-19 crisis. It partly reflects the fiscal stance of the previous government, and among them, especially among the government debt, the so-called the debt which is not backed by the financial assets. Now that ratio is rose to around 60% of the total government debt. Previously, it was less than 50%, but now the deficit, which should be financed by the tax, is now taking the portion of about 60%. So it shows that not just the total amount of government debt, but also the quality of the government debt is deteriorating, which means the future generation's burden is now increasing. And then, as you can see here, the total revenue and total expenditure, and you can see here, it may be explained by the COVID crisis, but there is the gap between the tax revenues and also the government spending. Government spending is now exceeding continuously over the government revenue. And then, I told you that our social insurance has some surplus in terms of reserve. So the consolidated fiscal balance is supposed to be the positive, stay in the positive side. But since 2019, the consolidated fiscal balance is also turned to the negative. So it's not a good sign. And now I will talk about then what the new government is trying to do. So in September this year, on September 2nd, the Ministry of Economy and Finance submitted the medium-term expenditure framework, which is the National Fiscal Management Plan for the fiscal year 2022-2014. And also they submitted the annual budget draft for the next year. And then I will talk about those contents briefly. And the annual budget draft is focused on reversing the expansionary fiscal stance which happened so far, and also they are emphasizing the restoring fiscal soundness. So the expenditure growth rate will be 5.2% to the initial budget for the 2022, but I already mentioned we had already 2 supplementary budgets this year. So we, in terms of that amount, which including the 2 supplementary budgets, actually next year budget will be cut by 6%. And also the fiscal consolidation is there, and we expect the Ministry of Economy and Finance estimate 24 trillion Korean won is saved through the fiscal consolidation for the next year budget, which is about 3.6% of the total budget for the next year. So usually the Korean government trying to do fiscal consolidation every year. So, but it usually, even though they work hard, it's usually between 1 or 1.5%. But for the next year budget, they doubled that efforts. And then for the medium-term expenditure framework plan, also the focus is the maintaining for the fiscal soundness. Also, but this is a new government, the medium-term plan. So they try to allocate resources to the new government policy priorities. So they are trying to maintain the managed fiscal balance, which excludes the social insurance, at minus 2% of GDP. And also they try to manage government debt level at the mid 50% of GDP by 2026. If you look at this number, okay. So if you look at this, so the blue is the last year's the medium-term expenditure medium-term plan. So as you can see here, for previous year, the medium-term plan was that the fiscal balance stays at the mid higher level of the minus 4%. But this year's medium-term plan, they shifted the plan. They say they will stay mid to 2% of the deficit level. But as you already mentioned, before the COVID-19 crisis, our fiscal balance is usually, even we incur deficit, it's less than 2%, and or usually between 0 and 1%, minus 1% level. So it shows that it's a very cautious stance. Even though we try to restore fiscal sustainability, but as you may know, the economic uncertainty is becoming bigger and bigger. So so it can be interpreted as a very cautious first step to restore fiscal sustainability. So, and then in terms of government debt, also they try to reduce the government debt from the previous the medium-term plan. Okay, then let's talk about our budget for the next year. I think they can be summarized in 4 ways. The first focus is the restoring fiscal sustainability. And then the second one is allocating resources to the new government policy priorities. And then thirdly, to do that, they try to secure fiscal space through the fiscal consolidation, which reflects also the new government, the policy, the philosophy of the government role is also involved there. And then lastly, they try to institute fiscal rules. So it's also a very politically contentious topic. So it remains, the Korean Ministry of Economy and Finance tried to pass this National Assembly this year, but it remains to be seen because the opposition party is the majority party currently. So it remains to be seen whether, because the previous government, they did not like the idea of fiscal rules at the time. So, but now they are opposition party, so it remains to be seen whether they try to contain the current government with fiscal rules or they just object to the fiscal rules. Okay, then let me briefly talk about what kind of fiscal consolidation strategy was adopted when coming up with a 24 trillion Korean won in terms of budget saving. First, they realigned the role of government and the private sector. The previous government's the philosophy is more about expanding the public sector. So, for example, they try to expand the delivery channel through the public organizations rather than using the private sector. But the current government is having exactly opposite stance. So they try to reduce budget for especially for the temporary public employment. In the previous government, the public employment, the spending has been also dramatically increased for the older people, and so the current government is trying to reduce that temporary public employment spending, but increasing for the spending for the job creation more permanent basis, like business development and that kind of more active labor policies, they are focused rather than temporary public employment. And also they try to shift the financial support programs from policy loans, direct loans, to the guarantees, especially for the the business which has a high credit ratings. And also they try to reduce direct support for the specific industry promotion. For example, there has, because of the rationale for the going green, there has been a very dramatic increase in spending in the solar energy. But there has been some skepticism and criticism about that strategy too, because the Korean, the weather is not very amenable for the solar energy or the other types of renewable energy compared to other countries. So the economic rationale for that strategy has been questioned, but the previous government was pushed that strategy very actively. So because of that, the current government is kind of trying to rationalize that spending. And then for the second strategy is the rationalization. They try to reduce budget for the programs lacking demand. For example, the previous government is trying to, they actually promoted the so-called hydrogen economy, right? The hydrogen cars. So the electric cars, then there is hydrogen cars. So the previous government was trying to promote that industry as the future growth growth engine, but but there has not been much. As you may know, some of you may know, the hydrogen energy is suitable for the large transportation for now, but for the small transportation, it's not actually economical. So also there is not much demand. So that's one example. So when there is a program lacking demand, we try to cut the budget for that. And also we try to shift program to focus reflecting changes of policy environment. So also we try to consolidate the service delivery channels. So as you may know, for the similar purpose, there are many delivery channels belong to different ministries. So we try to consolidate that kind of service delivery channels. And then, naturally, we withdraw COVID-19 spending, reduce public health spending, and also we try to normalize fiscal support for the self-employed, the small and medium-sized business. And then, it's kind of more, in terms of fiscal, I think, impact, it may not be so big, but in terms of a very symbolic gesture by the government, we try to save from the public sector. The first one is we have many committees in Korean government. I think it's about 700 committees in the public. Okay, sorry. So this is the last part. So okay. So we try to reduce that number of government committees, and also we impose a salary cap to the public employees. The minister and the vice minister are kind of they are voluntarily. They return 10% of their salary, and also the high-ranking officials' salary will be freezed for the next year, and also for the lower-rank officials, 1.7% salary increase will be permitted. So I think you already heard about the fiscal rules. Yesterday's the presentation, so I will not get into details. But if you have, but this is a very contentious topic, and so if you have in the Q&A session, if you any questions about this, then I will talk about this more. Thank you.